Hello, and welcome to my very short presentation. It's called Assembling Posthuman Pedagogies, Working with and in Black Box Social Networking Systems. I'm going to make three key moves here. Uh, First, I'm going to articulate what led me to teaching with social media and cover some of the literature. Second, I'll unpack why we might pause and reflect in this moment about teaching with social media. And then finally, my third move will be to introduce two systems theories that I find helpful in framing this problem, both to our field and to our students. So this is probably old news to many of us at Computers and Writing, but Kathleen Yancey presented her C's address in 2004 called Made Not Only in Words, Composition in a New Key. And she stated that in this moment, literacy practices are undergoing a tectonic shift in which the proliferation of writings outside the academy is counterpointing the compositions inside, and in which digital writing technologies are contributing quickly to the creation of new genres. And according to Yancey, this tectonic shift raises two key questions. What is writing in the 21st century, and how should we teach it? It's worth noting that a decade later, we can pinpoint more accurately what this writing looks like, and it seems to include in large part the writing common to social networking sites. Here we see that 92% of teens use the internet daily, 91% access it on a mobile device, and 71% compose on more than one social networking site. Clearly, this is another moment. We risk becoming outdated models of writing and of teaching antiquated forms of literacy when we flat out ignore what is currently the most used public writing platform by our students. In 2007, Stephanie Vai noticed the generational divide between social media savvy students and their more apprehensive teachers. 8 years later, she returned with her 2015 survey-based study to see where the field currently stands, finding that writing instructors primarily use YouTube, and that 90% of writing instructors interviewed agreed that they use it as a technological tool and as content for analysis or discussion. In other words, the bulk of teachers are using social media as content for the class, i.e. watching a YouTube video or rhetorically analyzing a tweet. And I wonder how Cynthia Self may respond to this. And Cynthia Self wrote in 1998 that our field takes comfort when the linkage between literacy and computer technology is portrayed as a socially progressive movement. Rather than advocating for the implementation of digital tech in the classroom, she's calling for teachers to pay attention to the ways that digital writing technologies affect them, educationally, economically, socially, politically, personally, and so on. And Stuart Silver makes a similar argument, only he's more pedagogically focused here. And he notes that our habits of teaching technology as neutral tools to use is a problematic, instrumental approach in which students will develop useful skills but will have a much more difficult time thinking critically, contextually, and historically about the ways computer technologies are developed and used within our culture. If we don't pay critical attention and we ignore the social realities that surround computer technologies and the literacies that they foster, making space for the reproduction of dominant cultural values in our classrooms. Since these calls, we've responded pretty well. Here we have a list of articles that I've used in the classroom and used for my own scholarship that take traditional rhetorical concepts and apply them to social media. And I am a big fan of these articles. And with that said, I want to ask, though, should we be doing this? And that's a funny question to ask, given how well these articles and others like them have done in transferring our knowledge from RetComp onto social media spaces. But in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal last year, and the more recent discovery by UpGuard Security in April, where they discovered 2 cases in which more than 540 million Facebook records were exposed on the public internet, we need to question whether we should be using these in the classroom and asking our students to engage with these. Now, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Mark Zuckerberg had a hearing in front of the Senate. And here's some of the things we learned. And this is a short list compiled by Business Insider, but there's a lot more we learned too. But here's some of the relevant stuff. Facebook records your mouse movements. It monitors whether your browser window is foregrounded or backgrounded, so they know when you're paying attention to their app as opposed to something else. They know your battery level of the device you're using, the signal strength, the storage space, your operating system, browser type, file names, plugins, your mobile operator, ISP, IP address, your cookie data, your time zone, your internet connection speed. They'd, in some cases, monitor devices around users on the same network. They know about your Bluetooth, the nearby Wi-Fi accesses and cell towers, your GPS location, camera info, photos if you don't lock down those settings, your call logs, your text history, data about your online and offline actions, purchases from third-party providers, information about the games, apps, or accounts you use, etc. Clearly, this is scary stuff, and it makes me wonder when/how we should bring these spaces into the classroom. If it is indeed the case that regardless of anything else, students are sort of these products being sold to ad agencies and third-party developers and surveillance capitalists, then we have to ask ourselves the question, what are we as teachers contributing to when we assign work in the sphere? And what I'm ultimately advocating for is that we pay more attention. I'm delighted to see this kind of work that we have done, which positions social media as a tool through which we can learn concepts like skillful argumentation, and as content through which we can sharpen valuable skills like critical thinking and rhetorical awareness. It's important work that strengthens our pedagogies by bringing our skills into the 21st century writing practices, and it needs to continue to be done as these sites continue to shift and adapt to user preferences. But I think our social media pedagogies need to be strengthened by developing some understanding of how systems function if we're going to continue to teach alongside social media systems, so that we can ask the right kinds of questions of these systems. Here I'm not advocating that we break the black box, but rather that we develop some sense of how to think about these systems rhetorically, so that we can exercise more rhetorical agency when we use them, teach them, or study them. To begin that work, I propose that we apply two popular systems theories that are already rising in popularity in our discipline: posthumanism and assemblage. And what I've compiled here on the screen are just some of the more recent relevant articles that I've used in the classroom that help students think about these issues. So a few years ago, really up until last semester, I've been using this matrix metaphor where social media becomes this matrix that I'm awakening them to. And that kind of positioned me as this Morpheus-like expert. And I realized that I don't actually have any knowledge of how these spaces actually function or for whom they function. And so not only am I teaching from a place of non-expertise, but I'm asking them to engage with spaces that have a history of data tracking controversies. And this made me think maybe I'm putting my students in danger without understanding the repercussions. I've always used this sort of 3.5 part framework where you move from functional to critical to rhetorical. This is Stuart Selber's framework. But I've been toying with this idea of ethical literacy and what that really means here. In assigning these students work on social media, am I really just contributing to surveillance capitalism and revenue generators, positioning students as products that their whole goal is for these students to continue to use them, and here I am having my students use them? I don't really know because I can't really know, because Facebook's system is black boxed, meaning we don't really know how the output works, how our input works. We don't even know when we are inputting, as that long list of data that they're tracking on us makes clear. But this does not relieve us of the responsibility of paying attention, as Cynthia Self would say, and stressing that we cannot know so many things about these systems. That's not my intention. Instead, I want to bring in posthumanism and assemblage theory to help consider how we might position ourselves given these truths. And here, posthumanism is useful in that it urges us to consider the human in the machine, and to consider how our own subjectivity cannot be separated from the machines that we use, machines that we actually put a lot of labor into upholding with every tweet, post, snap, and so on. I'm now going to briefly touch on posthumanism and then assemblage theory as a sort of 1-2 punch that might help us consider this dilemma. So posthumanism alerts us to the ways that the computer environments we engage with become a part of us. It urges us, especially in Catherine Hale's version, to reflect on how our individual agency functions within a posthuman subjectivity. The posthuman subject is an amalgam, a collection of heterogeneous components, a material informational entity whose boundaries undergo continuous construction and reconstruction. The posthuman subject, according to Hales, can be thought of as a system whose parts or elements flow between carbon-based organic components and silicone-based electric components to make protein and silicone operate as a single system. This means that the posthuman cannot be constructed as an autonomous subject with a clearly distinguished will existing separately from the will of others. Thus, the posthuman subjectivity is complicated by the ways that our own subjective experiences are spliced with others. If we consider social media, this might include those who directly affect our experience, such as other users, algorithms, bots, third-party apps, admins, and so on. And it also could include other aspects of the site, like trending topics, circulating cultural narratives anchored to stories, popular memes and GIFs, and so on. With all this going on, it becomes difficult to discern the self from one's Facebook experience. I'm now going to briefly unpack assemblage theory, which is complex but has a pretty simple premise. So assemblage theory states that any given system contains parts whose sustained relations constitute this ongoing assemblage. And these parts, though, are not defined by their current capacities exhibited in their current relations. But their current functioning in these relations do constitute their current capacity. And these parts, seemingly locked into certain roles, sustain the assemblage. One's current function as a part is stratified and territorialized. Everything around one user is segmented and ordered in a certain way according to a coded algorithm that ascribes order to which users have been agreeing to and basically playing a part of. As other users act according to this order, it becomes harder to consider other ways of functioning. One breaks away from their current function through what Deleuze and Guattari call a line of flight, which is a movement away from territorialization and stratification. So if we look at an assemblage in any given moment and say it means X, we blind ourselves to how this assemblage, again, a collection of parts whose relations define the assemblage only in its current state, we blind ourselves to how this assemblage functions in other ways, or could function in other ways. The assemblage and its parts in constant states of becoming, as they function on this plane of consistency, are always a multiplicity. They can and do have other functions. It's just that we flatten these functions at any given moment in order to define the assemblage as we currently see it. In doing so, we define parts that cannot be defined, but only described in their current function. So we've now run through at an alarming rate posthumanism and assemblage theory. And so I just want to conclude by sort of offering us these three takeaways that I see happening when we consider the two together. The first is that whereas posthumanism offers us this feedback loop to consider how we, as microsystems, exist within larger macrosystems that function as our environment, assemblage theory helps us to see ourselves as parts existing in multiplicity, carrying the capacity in any given moment to exhibit different capacities. We aren't locked into these feedback loops. We can reconsider boundaries and demonstrate agency if we wake ourselves up to how we are being flattened to function certain ways within the Facebook environment or assemblage. The second thing is, whereas posthumanism focuses on how a system maintains itself through homeostasis, assemblage theory emphasizes that parts can change, that assemblages exist in multiplicity, and that our current role in the system is largely a result of seeing the assemblage as only functioning in one way. Keeping this in mind helps us to be more careful with where and how we choose to engage with larger assemblages. And the third and final point is that whereas posthumanism emphasizes the need to awaken ourselves to the ways we have become a distributed self, assemblage theory emphasizes that we are not defined by current relations and can, in fact, in any given moment, change the assemblage's function by altering our capacities or seeing the ways that we already are functioning in other capacities. In short, posthumanism functions on being in the new age, awakening us to the ways that we exist as systems seeking stability and finding homeostasis within environments, while assemblage theory emphasizes that we are merely parts working in larger systems, always in a state of becoming, and thus always able to take a line of fight. We function as parts in certain assemblages in certain moments. We could always function differently. And that's all I got. So thanks for watching and listening, and please feel free to reach out to me with email. I know this was a rushed kind of run through, and I'd be happy to talk more about how I see this stuff working. Thanks, and enjoy the conference.